I'm very pleased to welcome Richard Engel this evening to talk about his new book, And Then All Hell Broke Loose. I'm guessing that you recognize Richard as the chief foreign correspondent for NBC News, where he reports regularly from a variety of far-flung places, mostly in the Middle East, and much of the time with things exploding in the background. So we're especially glad to have him here in this hopefully more sedate environment, at least for an hour or so. This is the story of his 2 decades of reporting in the Middle East, beginning with a stint in Cairo, where he went after graduating college with 2 suitcases and $2,000, and with the romantic idea of becoming a foreign correspondent. In this book, we learn about his education as a young reporter, how he went from picking up freelance work for radio and print to winding up reporting for a major news network, chronicling events throughout the Middle East, which in one case led to his kidnapping in Syria. But this book is much more than a memoir. He offers astute analysis of the current situation in the Middle East, of which I heard him tell Diane Rehm this morning, "I've never seen it worse." Kirkus Reviews has called this a deft personal account, a lucid, alarming overview of where the Middle East has been and where it's heading. And before I ask you to help me welcome Richard Engel, I just want to tell you that, not surprisingly, he has a plane to catch at the end of the event. So we're going to probably cut the Q&A just a little bit short and try and move everyone through the signing line to get their books signed. So please help me welcome Richard Engel.
Well, first of all, it is an absolute pleasure to be here. I can't remember the last time I've seen so many people in a bookstore, and that is encouraging on so many different levels. So buy this book, buy all the books, keep the industry going. As you just heard, this book is about the Middle East. I moved out to the Middle East 20 years ago. I graduated college, Stanford University in 1996. And the idea was that I was going to go to a place where I thought there would be a lot of news. Middle East seemed like a good choice. And I was going to start on my way, and I was going to become a great foreign correspondent, or at least a working foreign correspondent. So I moved to Cairo, and I really looked at the map. I had the map of the Middle East in front of me, and I thought, well, where am I going to go? Saddam Hussein's Iraq, not too many options for a reporter there. Syria, not much going on. Jerusalem, yes, lots going on, but probably oversaturated market to cover the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I thought, Egypt. Okay, and it's Egypt. So even if it doesn't work out, I'm still in Egypt, which is great. So I packed up a couple of suitcases and took a little bit of money and some savings, and I arrived and I rented an apartment there. And I had an incredibly rich experience. People were very welcoming to me. They wanted me to convert to Islam constantly. They would bring me to their homes. They would feed me things. I was never, ever alone. And while that can be tiresome after a while, it was a great way to become familiar with the culture and learn the language. And really, in a matter of months, I was having very incorrect but basic conversations in Arabic because I had no choice. You know, when you're living in an apartment where everything is broken and you need to communicate and there's no water and it's 1,000,000 degrees outside, you have to learn to talk to people. So I started reporting for local newspapers and then for international radio and then stringing pieces for newspapers, and really have been doing it ever since. And it's been 20 years now where I still live in the region. I'm very rarely back in the States. I'm here a couple of times a year to see families and encourage you to buy this inexpensive, readable book. But I'm back in the States very, very infrequently. And I've been living there now for 20 years. And there's a thesis in this book, having looked at the region for this long. And it's a model. And like all theoretical models, it's flawed. You could pick holes in it. You could find reasons why it doesn't work. But I like to think of it as a way to understand the Middle East right now. And the model that I chose, that the book is sort of based around, is a at least in my mind, is a row of houses. So if you think of a row of row houses, old houses that are on the coast somewhere, and they look beautiful from the outside, and they look like they've been there for forever, but they're rotten inside. Nobody's taking care of them. Nobody's opening the windows. Nobody's putting in dehumidifying apparatus. It's just crumbling. And the Middle East, when I arrived, was a little bit like that. 20 years ago, there was a structure in place. The big men ran the region. The Assad family, Mubarak, Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein, and it was established. It was locked in place. But like these old row houses, it was a lot of appearances. And on the inside, there was tremendous rot. And the rot was ignorance, nepotism, corruption, religious tensions that were kept at bay by strongman activities like those carried out by Saddam Hussein. And like in these old houses, you contain the rot, but if you don't open the windows and you don't open the doors and you don't spend any money on it, you also make it worse. And that was the situation, this very fragile paradigm. And you could put your finger through the wall, and instead, the United States put its shoulder through the wall of Iraq and started a sequence of events that we're still really living and experiencing to this day. So 8 years of direct military action started to destroy this status quo and unleash all of the rot, all of these demons that had been pent up within. And then the very soon to be 8 years of the Obama administration, we saw inconsistent policies. And they were supporting the revolution in Egypt, and then days later not supporting it in Bahrain, and supporting the uprising militarily in Libya, and then not supporting it in Syria. So kind of zigzagging through the Middle East. And the combined effect of these two, of 8 years of military action, and then very soon to be 8 years of this kind of zigzag, unleashed all of the rot that was in. And the old system as we knew it, the Middle East that I arrived to in Cairo, is broken. And the Middle East, what I said today, I've never seen it worse, is it's a period of chaos. And I think ISIS is the sort of physical embodiment of that chaos. And if you continue this model, you can just speculate on where it might go from here. And I think what we're going to see next is a series of strongmen reemerging themselves. And I think Egypt is probably the first example of that, and I think there will be more to come. And I think the people of the region are going to embrace this, but they should be very careful what they wish for, because after periods of chaos, as Europe has seen in this last century, when following chaos, when people embrace strongmen and dictators and fascists, really bad things can happen. I think that's what's coming. There's going to be a tendency for strongmen, and we will see how it goes. And I think our government and other governments around the world will probably reach out and embrace these leaders. And it doesn't have to be a binary choice. It doesn't have to be chaos or dictators. But after the chaos, I think we're going to reach back and hope for the dictators. And I hope one day, if there's people in this room who have some influence, maybe they can help find a third path and guide the region to some place where you have leadership and you have responsible governance, but it doesn't have to be Saddam Hussein's Iraq. So that's the framework of the book. But I tell it through my eyes. So I tell it through the people I know. I tell it through the places I've lived and the characters I meet along the way. And the thesis I just argued, I tell over 256 pages of anecdotes. So I hope that it is you get to follow along this journey that has been a 20-year journey so far of arriving in the Middle East, not really knowing what I'd landed into, trying to become a journalist, and then moving along in the process, and then just watching all hell break loose, and it is broken loose, and you have to see how it comes. So, with that preamble, I'd love to take some of your questions if there's anything specifically you have in mind. And I was told to ask you to approach a microphone if you can. So while you're doing that, I'll just take this opportunity once again to say thank you very much for coming and for reading books that I wrote and by other journalists and authors. So
thank you, Richard. Having been literally part of that world for almost 2 decades. When you arrived there, those young men and women who were born in the early 90s, we look at an entire generation of young people who are now in their 20s today. What hope do you see for these people that have been part of this turmoil, and what can be done globally to help them?
The reason, thank you, and the reason I worry that you're going to see strongmen arise is because the new generation has lived for the last 15 years or so in a period of terrible strife. They have been living the Sunni-Shia conflict. They've been living the Arab Persian conflict, the Kurdish-Turkish conflict, sometimes the conflict between cities at regional conflicts. They've been living in conflict. And it will be very easy for someone who comes along and say, you remember what it's like? Give me all your rights, and I'll make all of that go away. And there's another thing that's interesting, is there also sort of there's a belief that is spreading in the Middle East that the United States is responsible for all of this. Now, the U.S. isn't responsible for the Sunni-Shia conflict. We didn't kill the early caliphs. This was 1,000 years before the Declaration of Independence. We did not help create this divide. But if you live in Baghdad, and you've been living there for the last 15 years or so, the memories of what Saddam Hussein was like are receding. The reality of the Sunni-Shia divide is daily. And you can pick a date to when you remember that beginning in 2003. So you could see how they could make that mental association, that when the Americans came, they created the Sunni-Shia divide, even though clearly that chronologically doesn't make any sense. Sir.
Hi, once again, thank you very much for being here.
Wow, thank you.
And for responding. I wanted to ask you about one of the strongmen, or one of the potential strongmen, to get your assessment of Turkey.
Of Turkey?
The
Erdogan. I got it. I see where you're going.
Okay. The PYK, the reassertion of their sphere of influence.
Got it. Just for the sake of time, because the problem is Turkey, we could do a whole week discussing Turkey. It is one of the most interesting conflicts or dynamics. As the strongmen are trying to reemerge, you're also seeing the old empires trying to reemerge. Because when there is a breakdown of order, lots of people try to make hay. Russia, I think, is trying to reestablish kind of a czarist sphere of influence, and has decided that the way to do that is through keeping an alliance with Bashar al-Assad, making an alliance with some Kurdish groups, an alliance with Iran. Russia wants to spread its wings. And the same way Erdogan, he's been called a neo-Ottomanist. He wants to reestablish the Ottoman sphere of influence. And he has been trying to do that, but with mixed success, I should say. He's been blamed for reigniting a war with the Kurds when a peace process was going quite well. So his goal of establishing a new world order in the Middle East out of the chaos that was the old Ottoman world, I think he and a few others around him are still trying to do that. But he picked a big fight when he picked a fight with Russia, and that is limiting his project. And so far, the Middle East is not lining up to stand behind him and rejoin the Ottoman sphere of influence. So he's still pushing this project and this agenda, but with limited success. And I'm looking back at this line. There's no way we're going to get to this whole line, but solidarity to stay there.
Richard, once again, thanks for being here. I don't recognize you without your bulletproof vest on.
It's
underneath
jacket.
there.
It's the jacket itself.
Okay, but much of what we know in this country comes from you from the front line, by watching all your interviews on NBC Nightly News, on CBS.
It's a huge responsibility.
Not CBS.
I feel terrible now.
No, but really, when we think of all the countries you've been into and all the feed you've given us, so I want to pick your brain. You're a respected journalist. I respect you. Okay, but we've lost much of our men, of our resources by going into Iraq and Afghanistan, and the damage that's done there is almost unbelievable. The people that we've killed in our bombs, So where I'm going to go, you may not want me to go, but I'm going to go there. Okay, we entered after 9/11. Okay, the 2 buildings were hit with planes, and then Building 7 comes down at 5:20 in the afternoon. There's a lot more to the story that we are questioning our government and our commission about. What happened that day? Why did we do this? Do you have any kind of information for us that can put some light on this?
About the 9/11 attacks?
Yes.
No, I haven't really studied I know the aftermath of the attacks, but the answers that you seem to be looking for, I'm not the person who has those. I've lived in the Middle East dealing with the aftermath of 9/11. I wasn't in New York that day. I wasn't in Washington on that terrible day. I wasn't in the Midwest. So keep asking that question. I just don't have anything more to add to the debate.
Do you keep up with Stanford football?
Yes, I do.
Kevin Hogan, your quarterback, is from Gonzaga.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Mr. Engel. I honestly didn't know your name before this weekend, and I learned, I read about the kidnapping of the NBC News team and yourself in 2012.
Yes.
And in April of last year, it was effectively retracted, the story you told of the sheep. Do you recognize this as a false flag operation? A false flag being a group wants to make another group look bad, and so they will disguise themselves as that group. In this case, it was Sudis posing as Shiites. Is this right?
That is right. So, is that it?
Well, if so, are you interested in what role perhaps our own government had? John McCain, Lindsey Graham were 2 senators who were pushing at this time to arm and fund the Free Syrian Army. Was the Free Syrian Army responsible for this kidnapping and then rescue?
Okay. So there's two questions. One about just to make it a little more clear, 3 years ago or so, I was in Syria with a team of close friends and colleagues, and unfortunately we were kidnapped. And we were held by masked gunmen who loaded us into the back of a truck and then moved us from place to place. And while we were there the whole time, all of us, including several Arabic speakers, believed that these were regime loyalists, that they were people who were Shia militia. And we believed that by the way they were acting, by what they were telling us, by the way they were behaving. And it seemed very credible. And we got out. We got out of this horrible experience alive. Everyone on our team made it. And then a couple of years, we moved on with our lives. And then a couple of years later, we got a tip. And we said, well, there may be more there. These people who grabbed you, you might want to look again at them. So we did. We spent about 2 months digging back and trying to find out who and where, and it was complicated because a lot of the people had since been killed. And I do think that these people were probably, in all likelihood, it's very hard to know, frankly, and it goes to the point of how complicated the situation is and remains in Syria, where loyalties are often not what they seem, and alliances are of convenience. I think in all likelihood they were thugs. They were people who wanted a ransom. They were posing as regime loyalists, so in case we did get out, we wouldn't know who they were. That's the first part. So is it a kind of a false flag or a hiding of identity? Yes. Do I think that this was a conspiracy with the U.S. politics involved and Lindsey Graham and all this? No, I don't think so. I think this was much more local.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Mr. Engel. Thank you for being here. I'm a current defense reporter in D.C., aspiring foreign correspondent. It seems that much of the success in your career is due to the fact that you didn't just parachute in somewhere. You were in a region sort of long before other reporters arrived. So my question to you is, if you were...
If I were you, where would you go?
Yes, yeah.
I would get out of this town. If you want to be a foreign correspondent, you
Right.
by definition have to be foreign
Well,
and
yes, that's
correspondenting.
Right,
So
right.
I would look at the world, and this is what I tell other sort of young journalists and aspiring journalists. Think about what the world is going to look like in 20 years. Mm-hmm. So I took a gamble. If the Middle East had been a boring dud, I would not be here right now. I would have had a very uninteresting career. Nobody would have cared. No one would be buying this book. If it was 1986 when I left, I probably wouldn't have gone to the Middle East. I would have gone to Poland or Moscow or somewhere else. But it wasn't. It was 1996, and I was looking at the map, and I was thinking, the Middle East is probably going to be the story of my generation. So I would say to you, go home, think about it for a couple of days. What's going to be the story of the next 20 years? Maybe it's not the Middle East, and maybe it's the environment. So therefore, you should go to a place where you think the environment is going to be most impacted. Put yourself in a place like the great Wayne Gretzky, go to where the puck is going to be, not where the puck is now. So think about where politics are going to be over the next 20 years, and then go there.
So would you say maybe Africa? It seems like there's a ton of ISR investment there.
I think Africa is interesting. I think, frankly, the collision of environment and urbanization are going to define the next generation of times. I'm not sure if the next 20 years, if going to the Middle East, you may have missed it. I mean, in the last 10 or 15 years, there were two major American ground wars in the Middle East, one of which didn't go particularly well, and hundreds of thousands of troops cycling through there. As a foreign correspondent, are you going to do better in the next 10 years? Are you going to get more action in the Middle East than that?
Right.
Probably not. I doubt the 101st Airborne Division is ever going to be deployed en masse to Baghdad again in our lifetimes. I could be wrong, but I don't anticipate another Iraq-style war. So look at the map, think about all the different pieces, and then figure out where you want to be. Maybe it's Africa, maybe it's an environmental story, maybe it's the Zika viruses and the other types of horrible, mutations that are happening in nature as we warm up this planet. Maybe that's the story of the next 20 years. I don't know.
Thank you.
But it's a fun experiment to think about anyway. Wine helps. And then once you've thought about it and you've come to this dystopian vision, more wine helps.
I take that advice every day. I met you several years ago in Afghanistan at FOB Airborne, and I'd like to say I'm happy to be standing here in front of you stateside, that we're both here safe.
Well, it's nice to see you again.
I appreciate your service, and I thank you before you thank me for mine, because you're an unsung hero. My question...
Well, now I have to thank you for yours, so thank you for your service. No, you got to give me that chance.
My question relates to strategic tools of power. We generally go to military every time. Anytime there's an international crisis, the military steps up, or we look to the military. We did well using our economic power, and we did well with our diplomatic power with Iran. What can we do better diplomatically to not engage foreign leaders, but to engage the people?
Yeah, I think our and thank you very much. Thank you for your service. FOB Airborne was up in the Pesh Valley. Am I correct?
Wardak Province.
Wardak Province, which is one of the most dangerous, frigid, but also sort of beautiful parts of Afghanistan. And were we out there together and the vehicle broke down and we had to move the tow?
I wasn't there for that, but I had lunch with you at FOB Airborne. You utilized my nods for the week that you were
Oh, thank you very much. We borrowed some equipment off of him to do some filming, which probably is not allowed, but thank you.
But I was the fanboy that was just sitting there holding on to every word.
So thank you for loaning us the equipment. I hope we returned it to you. The problem with American, not necessarily just diplomacy, but engagement, as you said, is the U.S. continues to retreat and continues to go deeper and deeper behind into castles. Our diplomatic enclaves are castles. And oftentimes it's not the diplomats who are running the show, it's their security officers who determine who they can meet and when and for how long. And that's a problem. We're losing contact. You can't just listen to people's communications and read their emails from behind the walls of a castle. You lose contact. You lose the texture. I don't know why the United States doesn't have an effective cultural integration program. In Istanbul, the former U.S. consulate, right in the center of the city, is a Soho house, rented out for profit. And next door, there's an Italian cultural center that shows Italian movies, and you can come in and take Italian language classes. There's a French Cultural Institute that has parties and festivals seeming like every night. There's one from the Hollands. The U.S. doesn't do anything. We generally stay cloistered behind these walls and have meetings that get put online as they get leaked and put on WikiLeaks and things like that. So I think they need to try and engage more because staying in the castle, I think, doesn't serve our national interest. I don't know why we don't have a vigorous cultural outreach program, an American Studies Center. They don't really exist. We used to have them. To get into a U.S. diplomatic facility now, you have to wait online, and you can't even approach it really. And I think that does our outreach. And if somebody goes to in Istanbul, for example, in an Italian cultural center, and they're welcomed, and they're watching a couple of Italian movies, and they have pizza night, something simple like that. If you're a local kid from the neighborhood, it can actually change your impression of the country over time. And if you do that every day, I think it means something.
Yes. Did Lawrence of Arabia influence your career? The man, the myth, the movie.
The man, the myth, the movie, the legend? Yes. As shameful as it is to say. When I moved out to the Middle East, I was a kid. I still sort of feel like a kid, but I moved out to the Middle East, and I wanted to do this when I was a very young boy. And I was 13 years old. I was with my family, and we were in Morocco, and we were at La Mamounia Hotel, which is a glamorous hotel. And I was about 13, and I was sitting on the steps waiting for my mother to come out. My mother always comes out very well dressed, and she puts herself together, jewelry and clothes, and she's sort of from another era. And I was waiting there in front of this grand hotel, and there was a horse carriage right in the center of Marrakesh. And I had the International Herald Tribune in my hand, which unfortunately also doesn't exist anymore. And my mother came down the steps in a cloud of perfume and says, "You should work there one day. It's based in Paris." I said, "Okay." There it is. There it is. I'll be in Paris. I'll be in my office with my typewriter and my cigarette in the holder, and I'll write the next great novel. And that was what I wanted to do. So was it just Lawrence of Arabia? No, I don't know. It was the whole romantic ethos of being in an exotic place and doing something exotic. And it hasn't always been that romantic, but I still like the concept.
And is your mother a fan of Greta Garbo?
I'll have to ask her. Sir, thank you very much. But yes, there is a flair. If you're not having fun doing it, then there are easier ways to make a living.
You spoke earlier of strongmen dictators coming out of some of these revolutionary situations, and another option might be the installation of a puppet regime. We find ourselves in these wars often claiming to be be bringing democracy to this area. Is there any realism in that, in terms of country after country, Syria or Libya or any of them?
Well, there's two.
And how is that taking shape?
So there's two sort of questions in there. Will there be attempts to install these strongmen? Will there be attempts by other governments, other powers, to put in their own puppets? Absolutely. Will they succeed? Not sure. I'm not sure that every would-be strongman who is proposed by a regional government or proposed by his own people is going to survive. Some of them are going to get bumped off, and some won't make it. So this will be a work in progress. The other question is, can there be democracy in the Middle East? I hope so. I think they're not, people are people. I think it's going to be hard in this next period because they've had such a recent traumatic experience that I think they're going to be running away towards stability. But can there be democracy? Of course. They're the same people we are. They don't want to live under an oppressive society.
So I've been getting.
But we can't build it for them. Then it adds a whole nother layer of rejection that makes it difficult.
As someone who has been getting news from you for a long time, at not a very old age already. I'm wondering, where do you get your news from? And are there any sites or blogs that are lesser known that you might recommend?
You're not going to like the answer because there is no one place, frankly. You just have to read a lot. You have to look at social media. You have to read newspapers. You have to read books. You have to read. I mean, the thing that I tell people the most is read. I read a lot of books on the Middle Ages and the Crusades. It's a sort of pet project of mine, a pet passion, because a lot of what I do actually is religious studies. It's the Middle Ages and the Crusades in a new place, in a new time, with new weapons. So the more you can read, the more you can fill in the picture. I collect books. I read a lot of sort of very old and bizarre and antiquated books, but I find them interesting and illuminating. That would be the key thing. Just there's no blog or no tweet or no Facebook post or no amalgamation of that. That is the answer. The more you can read, the more you can read real books, almost on any subject, the more you will learn about the subject you want to know about.
Thank you.
See, I'm plugging the bookstore here. All of the product.
Hi, someone who spent a little time in Iran, the Middle East. I find your analysis sobering, but probably realistic. And it reminds me of the book by Crane Britton called The Anatomy of Revolution, which is basically, every time you have a revolution, the aftermath is, dictatorship. And I'm wondering, it seems like there's really no middle space. It's going to be really hard to have some, democratic reforms where there isn't repression from these governments. And I'm wondering, maybe the emphasis should be more on, when I was in Iran, part of the Iranian Revolution, there was no middle class. There was no vibrant middle class. And that seems to...
Education and middle class are the solutions, frankly. Over time, you need education, and you need people to have a little bit of money in their pockets. If you're desperate, you don't have a lot of choice. If you don't have no knowledge because you've been deliberately miseducated by your government, you're easily manipulated, and you'll sort of take whatever you're given. Long term, it's education and economic empowerment for women, for businesses, for everyone. That's the long term.
Are there countries where you see there's a possibility for that happening?
Iran, since you brought it up, is a really interesting case right now. I was just in Iran, just got back a few days ago from Iran, and I went there to see about the implementation. The Iran deal that was recently agreed to, there was an implementation day a few days ago, and that means that the IAEA certified that Iran had met its obligations, and the money should start flowing and sanctions should be lifted. And that process is already underway. And I was there, and I was talking to people who are very excited about change. I met a young woman at the stock exchange, and the stock exchange is it's not bigger than this room, really, and it's a couple of old push-button phones, and this young, very energetic, English-speaking stockbroker told me she's running to work in the morning. She's that excited. She gets up and she can't wait to get to work because she thinks the market is going to go through the roof and things are going to change. So you have a lot of people like her. I met other people in the market, in the bazaar, who were talking about how there's going to be tourists and there's going to be banking and they're going to be able to put their goods online and sell them on eBay and all of these things that they've been denied. So they were very excited about entering the world economic community or returning to it. But then you have the regime, which has a vested interest and doesn't really want to see things change. And it wants to have sort of perestroika without glasnost, economic opening, but with no political change. And is that possible? So you have half the society betting that it's not possible and saying, okay, open that door a little bit, and you're not going to be able to close it again. And then there's the people saying, no, we're going to open that door a little bit, and we're going to make sure that it doesn't open any wider. And who wins? I have no idea. And that's kind of one of the fascinating ideological and I think physical points of tension in the region right now. Thank you.
How about we do 3 more questions?
It's your venue.
Okay, 3 more questions.
So 3 more questions.
Well, just a comment. You just said that education and economic economic opportunity was the answer.
The answer to create a more moderate society that would allow democracy, a real democracy, to work. If you're always living hand to mouth or living with someone with a gun to your head, you don't have a lot of choices.
I want to point out that that's Bernie Sanders' message as well.
Luckily, I don't have to deal with any domestic politics, so I'm not even going to go there. I'm not even going there. We have so many people who spend all day long talking about this, so luckily I'm not one of them.
Hello, I wanted to ask you a question about the future of Islam and the struggle between the more moderate forces and the Islamist ones, and if you believe that Islam will become, I guess, whether the moderates will try to outpower the Islamists.
Sure. There have been, the short answer is yes, I think they will. I think ISIS is fairly short for this world. I don't think it's going to win. I think it has a losing strategy. I think it's unpopular. And I like to think of ISIS as a virus within the Middle East and a virus within Islam. And like any virus, you have a cold sore. It's inside you all the time. But when you're weak and you're broken down and you're sick, it comes out and manifests itself and then becomes contagious, to use this disgusting example. But that's a little bit like ISIS. It is there. It has manifested itself. It has become contagious because the body around it is weak. And I think eventually the body will become stronger and ISIS will recede into the darkness. It is the id of the Middle East, if you will, the dark recess of its mind that it doesn't really want to acknowledge. So there have been moments of fanaticism in all religious groups, in Islam as well, and generally history moves on and destroys them. But they have a space. That's the difference here. They have a physical place, and there's so much chaos and so many competing interests that are allowing them to have that space because nobody else can agree to a unified policy to fill that void. You would think, I mean, how much more odious can you get than ISIS? You would think that if we can't agree on anything, we can agree on destroying ISIS, but the world somehow can't. The Russians have an agenda.
Fear of that, or?
It's not that it's well, the people who are near ISIS are afraid of that, but it's bigger politics. It's the Russian agenda. Mm-hmm. It's the Turkish agenda. It's the Iranian agenda. It's the American confused and inconsistent policy there. It's the Iraq War. There's so many different reasons that would explain why there is this black hole in the region that is being filled by this toxin.
Thank you.
Sort of brought up cold sores. I didn't mean it, but that's I think in a.
All right, so it looks like I might be the last thing between you and your plane here.
No, I'm going to sign some books.
Okay, so I found the concept that after a civil war you always have strongmen. I mean, I think it seems grounded more in European history of the 20th century than in what we actually see in the Islamic world. If you think about it, you have Somalia, you have Libya, you have Lebanon, you have Syria, you have all these frozen conflicts where at the end of the war, of the civil war, we don't end up in a place where there's a dictator, but rather fjord-shaped borders and frozen conflicts.
Well,
and non-state actors in charge.
The state system, and since this is the last question, I'll thank you all first. But since we think of the state system, and it's been around in Europe for a long time.
Westphalia.
Yes, the Westphalia system is relatively new to the Middle East. The Middle East existed in an empire system. The Ottoman Empire, and before that the Caliphate, were more like the Roman Empire. They were large empires that were run from the center, but really, if you were out in the provinces, you ran your own affairs. And the modern state system, with states and flags and borders and uniforms and national anthems, was really just carved up after World War I. So in the region, it's relatively new. And frankly, since World War I, it's been relatively unsuccessful in the Middle East. The state system hasn't worked very well for the region. And I think that's why, if you look at the state system, you had the mandates for a brief period after World War I. You had a few decades of mandates, mostly ruled by the UK and France. Then after the European countries decided, even after that World War I wasn't enough, they had to commit suicide again with World War II, the United States stepped in and became the sort of overlord of the state system for a few more decades. And then the United States decided through the last 20 years of action that we were going to destroy that system. So I think we're really at a pivotal time. It hasn't happened yet where the old state system has been torn apart the way it's been torn apart right now. And it's been reduced to something that is quite new. It's almost like going back to the days of 1919, where there's just been a chaos, there's really no nation states anymore, and these antecedent conflicts that were always there have emerged to the forefront. So is it a European model? Yes, Europe has had nation states and nation state systems longer. So we're really in a new phase in the Middle East. And with that, you can chew on that on your drive home. And thank you very much. And I'll sign as many books as I can.